There is a beautiful Jewish concept or value known as Torah Lishma. This could be thought of as learning for its own sake, though our tradition names a few different interpretations. For example, the Talmud, throughout its various tractates and commentaries, teaches us that Torah Lishma could be learning to fulfill the mitzvah of study itself, specifically to learn how to fulfill other mitzvot, or for the sake of better knowing or loving God. In a modern manifestation, as part of my rabbinic role here, I help to facilitate a young adult study collective in collaboration with our partners at Beth Tzedek, Annex Shul, and the Mars Nadal JCC called Lishma. This semester, as we have played the role of host synagogue, I've been lucky enough to participate in a bit of learning, an island and a gift in an otherwise busy week. So after what we can acknowledge has been another rough week in the news, let's take a break for a few minutes and in the spirit of Shabbat, learn a little together. The text that we looked at in our class entitled Are You There, God? Is looking at the place of God in a world of suffering. And a response that we looked at in this week was from the Talmud Sanhedrin. The story goes as follows. When the Holy One, blessed be God, came to create man, God created first a group of ministering angels and asked them, "Do you agree that we should make man in our image?" They replied, "Sovereign of the universe, what will be his deeds?" God showed them the history of mankind. The angels replied, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" This quote from the Psalms implying, "Let man not be created." God destroyed the angels. God created a second group and asked them the same question, and they gave the same answer. So God destroyed them too. God created a third group of angels, asked the question yet again, and they replied, "Sovereign of the universe, the first and second group of angels told you not to create man, and it did not avail them. You did not listen. What can we say but this? The universe is yours. Do with it as you wish." And God created man. But when it came to the generation of the flood and then to the generation of those who built the Tower of Babel, the angel said to God, "Were not the first angels right? See how great is the corruption of mankind." And God replied with this verse from Isaiah, "Even to old age I will not change, and even to gray hair I will be patient." Now, there are a few pieces that we could point out as we process this passage. The first is the role of God. We could ask ourselves a couple of questions here, such as, was God stubborn? God goes not to one, but three groups of angels, asking each of them the same question. They give God an answer that it appears God does not like, so the response is to simply destroy them and keep asking until the third and final group basically says, "Do what you want," and God does. And even when God sees what is considered to be by the rabbis the worst of humanity, this lecherous generation of Noah and the ark, and even when this third group of angels point out the disastrous consequences of human behavior, God essentially turns to them and replies, "Just you wait and see. Although it might take a while, although it might seem like nothing will ever change, you'll see." Subsequently, we can ask ourselves, did God have doubts? In the need to seek advice so many times, in the need to have this grand idea validated by other ethereal beings, perhaps we can infer that God wasn't quite so sure about bringing humanity into being. Perhaps rightly so. As an entity often depicted as omnipresent and all-knowing, God theoretically would have known exactly what the chorus of angels would see when they were revealed that historical timeline. As our class described it, it was a big bet for God to place. Normally, in our human eyes and our human thinking, we would only place bets on a gamble we felt sure was going to pay off. When we truly feel like we're going to win the raffle or the prize money, or even win in the broader sense, right? We'll adopt that shaking, scared puppy from the shelter and believe it's going to melt into a sweet and playful companion with a bit of love and care. We move our kids to a different school and believe they'll widen their circle of friends. We take that job and believe we'll be happier and more successful in the new workplace. We buy that old rundown house and believe we can turn it into our dream home. We enter into a new relationship and believe they'll turn out to be the love of our lives. These are significant risks to take, and we'll return to this idea of risk shortly. So we only take them if we're sure that the bet will pay off in spades. How much more so when it comes to the divine and full knowledge of the outcome, choosing to create this messy and complicated species called humanity, one with an enormous capacity for good on one hand, and on the other, an enormous capacity for evil, and choosing to do so anyways. This brings us to a bit of an interlude, which is to examine the purpose of the rabbis in composing such a story. An element our class noticed was the anthropomorphism of God, as portrayed by the Isaiah quote. It was a surprise to some that God would be described as having human features, such as grey hair, or human attributes, like patience, which made us realize the following: that the rabbis, and indeed we too, only have the language that we have, and therefore can only describe something in terms that we can understand, even though we're attempting to describe something that cannot be understood or comprehended, that being the divine and eternal God. That similarly, the rabbis could only frame the questions that they were really trying to ask in a framework that they felt and knew comfortable in. When analyzing these texts, it's important to try and get to the question that lies underneath the question. And when we probe, we might discover that, in fact, the rabbis of old were pondering issues that still resonate with us today. When weaving this tale of God arguing with the angels prior to creating mankind, the rabbis were, in fact, posing some of the existential dilemmas that we grapple with. Why do we exist? Why did God create us the way that we are, even though we could have been made any other way, according to God's divine image and imagination? Why do humans suffer, and/or why do humans cause suffering? Why has this suffering become such an integral part of our history and memory as Jews and as a people? Put another way, God is only framed in human terms because, as humans, that's the best we've got. This brings us squarely to the last aspect of our Talmud text, the role of humanity. Humans were, according to the Psalms, fashioned as a step lower than the heavenly beings, the angels, but crowned with glory and honor. Of course we would say that, though. As humans, we want to feel that there is a greater reason for our existence, that our lives have a grander meaning than simply being part of a random and chaotic coincidence of creation, a quirk of luck and circumstance. It is remarkable to think that, despite our proclivity to make mistakes, our potential to wage war, be struck with sickness, propagate hate, despite any of our innumerable flaws, there is still perceived to be a spark of the divine light accorded to each of us, mere mortals, on this earthly realm. Nevertheless, God created us anyway. As the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote regarding our Talmud tale, even though by creating humans, God was putting the entire future of creation at risk, God went ahead and made humankind. This is a radical theology. The Talmud is telling us that the existence of humankind can only be explained by the fact that God was El Melech Ne'eman, that God had faith in man. The real religious mystery, according to Judaism, is not our faith in God, It's God's faith in us. This was, in other words, not purely a risk, but God's biggest leap of faith. And that balancing act may have indeed been a very human move to make. As we find ourselves in the Omer, it seems fitting that one of the customs of this time period is a taste of Torah Lishma, however we envision it, by looking at a small section of Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors, each day. As such, we conclude with this verse from Pirkei Avot, which was not, full transparency, a part of our study in class this week. And it goes, Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol ha'osek b'Torah lishma, zoche ledvarim harbeh. Rabbi Meir said, whoever occupies himself with the Torah for its own sake merits many things. Not only that, but they are worth the whole world. They are called beloved friend, one that loves God, one that loves humankind, one that gladdens God, and one that gladdens humankind. Therefore, whilst humanity was God's greatest gamble, we may also have been God's greatest prize. In being God's biggest risk, we equally have and had the potential to be God's greatest reward in our immense capacity for love as well as chaos. In being God's partners in creation, in our human quest to know and love God better, we can live in that grey space, and in that grey, find a spark of sacredness. We can make God's biggest bet worthwhile, lishma, for God's sake. Lishma for our own sake, and lishma for the sake of a world that this week I felt could use a little love in the form of some Torah lishma. Shabbat shalom.